Hey everyone, welcome back to Electoral Dysfunction, the show where comedians and experts discuss the news of the week from the safety of their quarantines. I'm your host, Tom Brennan. We got a great show for you today, our 11th show. Very excited to be doing this. Before we get going, I just want to quickly remind you that the people who do this show do it for free. Our guests, our creators, everyone is contributing their time and their talent. Many of these people are artists who lost their jobs or gigs that were making them considerable income due to the pandemic. So the show has started up a Patreon page, patreon.com/electoral dysfunction. And if you would like to donate something to these folks to help them out and thank them for their time entertaining you, please do so. As I said last week, I'm still working full-time. I'm fine. None of this money will go to me, not a dime. I will send it back to the folks who made this show happen. They deserve it. They've been wonderfully loyal and supportive friends, and it's been great working with them. So if you are enjoying the work they do, please consider donating. We really appreciate it. That's all for me for this week. We're going to get going with the show. I'm really excited. Great panel. But first off, Ned Thorne, star wipe us to the guest. Joining us now, we're really excited to have him. We've been doing this show for 11 weeks now, and this guy has been in contact every single week, supporting the show, giving us a lot of love. He emailed me saying how much he'd want to be a part of it. So I'm really excited to have with me today Electoral Dysfunction super fan, Michael Newman. Michael, how are you?
Hey, hey, Tom. Hey, I love this show so much, and thank you for giving me this chance to be on the panel. I just get really nervous, and I have trouble, putting my things together, thoughts.
Sure. So, I love to have a little conversation with you and see if, try you out here. We're giving you a little bit of a test run.
Yeah, this is huge. When I wrote that email, my friend helped me write it. And so, yeah, God, Tom, you all are so cool. I'm ready. I'm ready.
That at all. I wouldn't call us cool in the least, but I thank you for that. So let's just talk. We'll start with some questions. Relax. It's okay. We're really glad to have you here.
Oh, that's awesome. Oh, okay.
So, the big news this week, of course, is the killing of George Floyd in Minnesota and the outrage that sparked the protests around the country. What are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on what happened and how we got to this point?
Okay. So, geez, I think that racism is not something that should be in the world, and I think that a lot of people should have their voice heard by other people, and it's Tom, can I take that over? Okay. What I wanted to say, I think
Sure.
People of Milwaukee, Minnesota,
Minneapolis, not Milwaukee.
Right. And I think that the president needs to stop tweeting about Benghazi. Oh, okay.
Hey, Michael, you're doing great. We'll go with something a little smaller. We're both in New York City. How about the situation with Amy Cooper in Central Park last week? Birdwatcher Christian Cooper was trying to inform her of the rules of Central Park, and she called the police and in a clearly racist affront to try and defend herself. What were your thoughts on that circumstance?
Amy Cooper is a dog walker who was racist, and
true. Yes, got it. Good.
A racist dogs that they shouldn't be racist dogs and people. And Christian Cooper watches birds because my brother-in-law watches birds too, and they don't like dogs. But I think Amy Cooper needs to check herself before she does other things to people. Oh God, Tom, I'm
That's true.
sorry. God, I sounded so dumb.
No, I mean, you landed on a really smart place. I think everyone would agree with you. She needs to check
The
herself
people
before
on your panel, they're so like, how do they do it? They're so smart, and I think it's just like
you're no dumber than any of them. They're just themselves. They relax, and just take a deep breath. Maybe your tie's a little out of whack, but you know what? It's
okay.
too late
Oh,
now.
jeez.
It's quite all right. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. Don't worry about it. Don't worry. Let's start very small. Here, we'll
Okay.
go real simple.
Right.
HBO Max launched this week. People are joking. It's not HBO. It's just TV. We got Friends, The Big Bang Theory. What do you think of HBO Max's launch? Are you going to be buying it?
I think that during the global coronavirus, people need time to learn about TV. But you bring up a good point, Tom. Will I be buying it? I don't.
Yeah.
HBO made Hulu. I mean, Hulu's on a streaming service that can. I have Hulu and.
Michael, I'm gonna stop you.
Tom, let me.
It's been great to have you. No, it's been wonderful to have you, and I'm so glad that you love the show and that you listen. And please, feel free to email me anytime. I don't know if you're quite ready for the panel yet, but we'll always you keep working at it, and I'm happy to keep trying you out.
Wait, really? That's some.
Yeah.
That's the biggest yes I've gotten in like 6 years. Thank you, Tom. Thank you. Thank you.
That's rough. You know what? We gotta get to the panel now, and I'll tell you what, because you're so kind to donate your time, I'm gonna let you be the person to tell Ned Thorne, our director, to star wipe us to the panel. Take it away, Michael. Tell him to do that.
Okay, I got this. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, BJ Thorne. Can you put us in?
BJ Thorne, it's Ned Thorne.
And now, the panel at the theater.
Okay. You know what? Don't worry about it. I got this. Ned Thorne, star wipe us to the panel.
I love Electoral Dysfunction.
All right, and join me in welcoming this week's panel. First up, she is a columnist for the New York Post. Carol Markowitz is with us. Hey, Carol, how are you?
Thanks for having me.
Good to have you back. Very funny comedian and out-of-work bartender, Darcy Burke, with us on the show. Hey, Darcy.
Hey, guys.
I'm looking forward to a cameo from the dog throughout the show.
I'm so sorry in advance.
It's going to be fun. Another very funny comedian, improviser, and social worker, Marcely Jean-Pierre, is with us. Hey, Marcely, how are you?
I'm well. Thanks for having me.
Good to have you. Another very funny comedian and also communications director for the U.S. Federation of Workers Co-op, Mo Manklang Kingston, is with us. Mo, did I mangle the name of your organization?
You got there. You got the right words.
Yes. All right. One win on the week. And of course, editorial columnist for the New York Daily News, handsome man about town, Robert George. Hey, Robert.
Thank you, Tom. Good to be back. What are we saying? I'm always here.
You're always here, yes.
It's not like I've gone anywhere.
Well, it's good to see you once a week. So this was a very, I think, difficult week in the United States of America. On Monday, we had the killing of George Floyd in Minnesota. Later in the week, we hit the 100,000 death mark in the COVID-19 pandemic. And we saw protests, outrage throughout the country over the killing. And to make things even worse, Saturday night is MAGA night at the White House, in which I assume ladies will not drink free. So I think in the end of this week, I want to start with something I think we can all agree on, and I think really brought the country together this week. And it involves me giving some credit to the President of the United States, who is still, as of this writing, Donald John Trump. On Thursday, he said he would love nothing more than to get rid of his Twitter account. And I think that's something the entire country could be like, yeah, let's do it. I feel like across the board, even people who were like some of his strongest supporters were like, yeah, that'd be great. give
the brother his props. There you go.
Yeah. Well, I'll let you say that.
I was like, how are you going to end this? Giving props to the president. I don't know if I'm going to agree with whatever you're about to say.
I leave that to Robert. But with that out of the way, let's talk about a difficult week in America. And we start, of course, I think on Monday, in Minneapolis, Minnesota, a man named George Floyd was killed by a police officer during an arrest. And the white police
Actually,
officer.
Tom, just to be clear, this got a little bit confusing. The death actually happened Friday a week ago. The video.
Oh, the video. I'm so sorry. The video came out on Monday.
The video came out on Monday. Yeah.
Thank you. The video came out on Monday, and it sparked, as I mentioned, outrage across the country. Friday night, we saw protests not just in Minneapolis, but in New York City, Houston, Charlotte, North Carolina, Omaha, Des Moines, Iowa,
Sacramento,
California.
Yeah.
Not exactly. It happened anywhere. What really struck me about this, and I thought was interesting as the story came out, is that the debate that has raged after this has been about the protest, not about the incident itself. It was not. It seems like even the furthest right pundits, I think, were even, I think Gene Pirro on Fox News denounced the death. Rush Limbaugh said, and I quote, "I can't justify that." Don't know why you need to justify it, but still, there's not much debate over the fact that this man should not have died. The debate has now moved towards the protest, the nature of the outrage. And that struck me. Even the president of the United States, who, not exactly known for being measured in his statements, did initially say, talk about being troubled and call for a Justice Department investigation. Why do we think that is? Do we think the needles moved on these kinds of on these stories? Do you think it was just the sort of inarguable evidence of the video? What are we thinking?
Well, I would say that unlike similar episodes where even when there has been video, this time it was just so really stark, and some of these other police involved deaths, because this was not a shooting but a police involved death, things happen so very quickly that people start saying, well, it's a spur of the moment thing. The cop, felt endangered. He overreacted, but it was a momentary thing. This was 8 minutes. This was 8 minutes where a police officer has his knee on the neck of this man, and the man is handcuffed. So there's no question of, oh, he was resisting, he wasn't resisting, this kind of thing. And you hear, and it's the sound of the bystanders is what makes it so chilling. You hear them saying, he's not moving, he can't breathe, let him up. And so it's just one of those kind of things where I think everybody was able to put themselves into this position and saying this is wrong. This is just absolutely and completely and totally horrifying. Even the most, if you're a conservative Christian, you can realize that this is not a Christian thing to do. So it is one of those things where even, and then you had all of the representatives from police departments across the country saying, this is not what we do. This is not what we're trained to do. So you had immediate consensus on the horror of the act. And then, of course, it was the reaction of, it took a few days for them to come out with charges. But if anybody who's seen these type of episodes before knows that you don't usually get a charges against a police officer within 4 days of something coming to light. But so you had this one moment of consensus, and then of course the protests happened, and then here we are.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to add, I think absolutely the undeniability of the video plays a huge part, because prior, with Trayvon Martin, it's, he say, she say, there aren't that many witnesses. So all we can really base our feelings and our judgment off of is what the murderer said, and pretty much in some of the audio that was picked up, but we don't have the video evidence of everything as it, as it continued to escalate. And as it turned out, we literally witnessed a man being killed and screaming for his mother, you know, and just you could hear and feel the pain in not only his voice, but in the voice of the other people who were witnessing it live. So I think because there's not a slither, because if there was a slither of deniability or whatever it is, or a slither of doubt, there's plenty of people who would have taken that slither and would have expanded it into a bigger narrative. So I think it absolutely has something to do.
The fact that other people there also just added to our understanding of it, because I think a lot of people believe like, well, if I saw that, I would say something, but they did say something and it still happened. And it turns out that it doesn't matter if somebody speaks up, because we all think, you know, should I be in a situation where I have the opportunity to speak up and stop that kind of oppression, I would do it, but that's not enough. It turns out that that's not enough.
I think what I don't want to do, though, is give credit to Trump for his reaction to it, because what I feel like is like there was reaction, you know, like you said, there's even the reaction from Fox News that this is not okay, calls against it, and I think that he leans on that way more than he leans on his own personal conscience to say this is wrong, because I mean he didn't respond for way longer than he should have. And I think he really relies on the media to decide like how he's going to react based on how Fox News reacts.
I think that's a fair point. We've talked about this on the show before too. Like he will go towards what's popular, you know,
Yeah.
and yeah, there's that collective thing. I also think like, and this goes beyond Trump. Like I think sometimes we get a little too quick to be like, I should give this elected official of any stripes credit for saying the bare minimum. Right. It's like, you know, going out and saying, you know, I support or oppose this, like, is good. It's like a first step. You know, we all don't get credit for the first step. And I think like I do it. And I am someone guilty of this all the time. Like if it's someone I like, I'm like, see, he said it. He's the best. All right. Chris Murphy, 2020. That would be senator. Anyway, Darcy, you had a point before.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of the reaction coming from all sides of the spectrum, like outright condemning the video because it was undeniable what we saw, I think part of it that is important to note is that the narrative surrounding the victim, they couldn't, like he doesn't have a mugshot floating around. Like he doesn't have a history of run-ins with the police necessarily. And so as a result, like there wasn't an opportunity to paint it as justified. And I think that's important to think about in the context of it. Like he truly, like in the eyes of the narrative we like to apply to these events, like it wasn't justified in any way, shape, or form. Not that even if he had those things in his background, it would be, but we've all seen it play out beforehand, you know, in other incidents where that stuff is used to dehumanize the victim and to justify these incidents.
Actually, as it happened, he did have a background, but it worked more into what could be considered a redemption narrative. He had actually had a number of run-ins into the law down in Texas, but he moved to Minnesota. I think he had more. There were more family members up there, so he moved up there, and I think he'd been up there for like 6 to 8 years, and has had, from what I understand, a spotless record. So it really was a case where somebody, yes, he had issues with the law in the background, but it was a clear case of him turning his life around. So
Yeah,
which in a sense sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah, I mean, I know that that's where we go after this kind of stuff happens, but like we have to fight back against that because it's so irrelevant. It makes no difference whatsoever. I don't care what he did. I literally don't care I don't care if he was robbing something in that moment. You do not put your knee on a human being's neck, like period, end of story. We can't let it even like go past that.
Yeah, especially when we've seen countless times of, you know, people being arrested after shooting 9 people in a church, you know, being taken to Burger King, you know, and you know, very gently being taken into custody. So just it's completely inexcusable despite any background information on the victim.
I do wonder though, in terms of earlier, Tom, you were talking about moving the needle in how the media portrays these events, how we as a public react to it. I wonder if that is a sign of the needle being moved, that this was allowed, you know, like as Robert was saying, it's a redemption story versus, you know, a man who had a background. I wonder if maybe that's a sign that we as a culture are slowly and clearly not enough shifting. I don't know the answer to that. It's just,
I also kind of wonder if, you know, we're all stuck in our houses, right? We're all under lockdown, so you can't be busy with the things that you would be doing otherwise. You can't be out with your girlfriends or like at your job for like 60 hours a week. You're home and you're on your phone or you're in front of your TV and you're exposed to this. You literally can't look away if you are looking at a screen. So
that's a great point.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, like, it's a thought that kind of helps, I think, pivot towards the conversation about the protests that we've seen. I feel like what we're seeing in the streets is as much anger at what happened as it is anger at this moment. Like, we've been told a zillion times by our leaders in this moment in time, like, life's changed forever. You know, like, COVID-19 has changed everything. All of our lives have changed. Like, everything's different now. And yet this was still the same. This still happened. Like, the death of an unarmed Black man for no reason still happened. And, you know, I think what you're seeing is as much a reaction to that history of racism, that brutality, as it is to, like, our leaders have been. I think another thing that I think kind of unites left and right at this moment in time, like, I think we all kind of agree, whether we might disagree on what the policy is to handle it differently, that we don't feel like the average American is being served well by the response to COVID-19, you know, and we're being told by leaders like, you know, you have to stay home. And it's like, I see as much a certain amount of frustration, like, these people have made me give up every aspect of my life and stay home. Maybe it's best that I do, maybe it's, you know, like, regardless of that. And I'm still, you know, like, and these injustices still exist. Like, I've had it. I think we are looking at a country that, you know, has just had it with everything that feels wrong. And exactly that point, we kind of stay at home and have to watch these things.
I agree, Tom. We should all become anarchists, like,
Let's
ASAP.
do it. Done.
I am in. That's it.
I am as pro anarchy as it gets, so long as no one comes near my apartment. That's my stance on anarchy. I'm on the 6th floor. There's nothing. You don't want to come. There's nothing of value here. What, I got like a couple of posters I tore out of a book. Go ahead, Robert.
Well, no, I was saying, but this is where, you know, this is where the consensus, you know, started to break down. Where you suddenly have all of these people out marching in the streets, and it's like suddenly, oh well, social distancing, well, maybe not so, you know, maybe not so much. And it was fascinating on Twitter, where, of course, you know, only good things can happen with discussions on Twitter. People starting to point out that, you know, some of those more on the progressive side who were chastising those in some of the if not more, I guess, more of the purple states, who were out marching, demanding the lockdowns to end sooner. Progressives were criticizing that, and now there are a lot of progressives out marching, marching in the streets. And so you suddenly had this discussion going on as, you know, what is a legitimate cause to break quarantine for? And those on the conservative side were saying, you know, it's for opening up businesses, economic freedom. The progressives were saying, oh yeah, it's just because you want to have a haircut.
Why not both? Why not both? Why can't we do both?
Why can't we do both? And
one of them involves people dying, and one of them doesn't. So.
But that's the thing. The conservative, the conservative or libertarian pushback on that was, well, if a business has been closed down, or if people aren't working, you know, that's bad. That's bad for their health as well. So that's
where
not
just the economics of it. What about all the people that aren't getting, like, cancer screenings? What about the fact that dentists are not considered essential? Something I discovered when I needed emergency dental surgery like 2 weeks ago. It's like there's no sanity. There's no, like, this is what we need to do to fight this virus, and here's why that makes sense. It's just like blanket, like, you know, the fact that you can go to the beach in New York but not go in the water, but in California you can go in the water but not go to the beach. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Like,
it takes a lot of time to govern.
I think I'm the only person here, maybe right of center, but, like, you know, I stopped sending my kids to school before it was the official rule to do that. I took this very seriously. I'm no truther. It's just like, none of it makes any sense anymore. So I think that's where a lot of people on the right are. Like, it just, the rules make no sense, and therefore, like, we have to just stop this.
Well, I think a point of, and I'll let you get in a second, a point that occurred to me there is just the idea that, like, I think what's the common thread there is that, you know, it is on leadership. The right to protest is important. It's a thing that should be protected.
Yeah.
And when we knew that people had to stay home, it would have been great if leadership had thought together, like, maybe we should create plans and like best guidelines for protesting that we could send out to everyone. And then, like, you know, maybe people obey them, maybe people they don't, but at least, like, I think what you're saying speaks to just a complete sort of, like, we planned as far as stay home. And then after that, I was like, I don't know. Mo, go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think in the absence of like a federal level, like, here's the guidance about like what different people should be doing in different regions, and saying, hey, let the states decide. And then people are rising up to fill that gap, and they're doing it in all different kinds of ways. And you're seeing like governors trying to create like some semblance of like alliances or shared planning, but there's no action like that that's coming from the federal government that's trying to really do that in any meaningful way. So I think like you are seeing people getting pissed off because it's different in different areas, but it's because there's no one that's actually trying to get everybody on the same page. So in the absence of leadership, like, people got to do something. And I think that's where a lot of the frustration comes. Is why we have a federal government to help us figure out shit like this.
Yeah.
Man, it's a dark week.
Yeah, and also, I mean, another thing that contributes to the anger, like, or the frustration, at least for me and a lot of people that I know, is also seeing just the way that protesters with guns were treated, as opposed to, and the narrative around, you know, the protesters who come march, you know, with guns, screaming in the face of police officers, and just seeing how they're handled and how they're spoken about, as opposed to every time, you know, Black folk try to peacefully protest, we still get called son of a bitches or whatever it is from the president, or we, you know, get just like categorized as misfits, as opposed to, you know, the way that people of other demographics have been referred to.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, yes, obviously there's no mechanism for protesting right now. It's all willy-nilly in terms of regulations, and I understand the frustrations of people. And I, to an extent, like, I get the people who, you know, strapped on their ARs and marched because they're worried about their livelihood. I mean, I don't think we're gonna have a beer or anything, but like, I get where they're coming from, in part because, like, I'm not from the East Coast. Like, I'm from out in the middle of nowhere, and like a gun culture and yeah, whatever, and libertarian, and I get it. Yeah. But it is what you were saying about like the treatment of how they are viewed and how the police react to it. Because there's no question in my mind that if those protesters that were screaming in the faces of police with all their gear strapped on, wrong, by the way, which a lot of military people have pointed out, like they're wearing their equipment wrong, which I think is hilarious. If they had been a different color, like, the reaction would have been different. And we can see that because the reaction last night, I don't know, I'm sure you guys were following it, was very different.
But isn't there the whole, like, Chris Cuomo yesterday kept repeating over and over that the crowds are actually very diverse. And there's all this, I saw, I mean, I didn't read the whole stories today, but that everybody arrested in Minnesota last night was from outside the state. And then I forgot where, but somewhere everybody who was arrested was white. It's like,
Probably Des Moines.
Isn't the story today that there's like white supremacists like trying to stir up trouble, but obviously Antifa is there as well doing the same. And like, I actually don't relate to the people who strap on the AR-15s and go to the State House. I grew up in Brooklyn. Like, I don't know, you know, that's not my universe. But like, I don't know that necessarily that they're being treated so wildly different than, you know, the people who were arrested last night.
I mean, I was at the protest for the early hours in Brooklyn. I left before things really escalated. But I definitely, I agree, the crowd was diverse. But I think that's a reflection of the area we're in terms of Brooklyn, and also just the general kind of reaction to the recent events. And my experience was it was completely peaceful. There were a few people who were obviously very upset, and, you know, agitating. But in general, the acts of aggression I saw were mainly coming from the police side. And later on that night, following events with like other people I knew who were there and what they were posting on Twitter, like it was a similar thing where, yes, people were throwing bottles or something like that, but the response was not proportional. Like,
well, you did have a couple of episodes where, I mean, well, there was one really awful one in Brooklyn where a Molotov cocktail was tossed into a police van, and it was thankfully by the grace of God, none of the police officers were injured, and they had some. There were some what we should call just radical types that were there. In addition, there were bricks being thrown. I think at least one police officer got literally brass knuckles in his face. So there were and I'm just speaking for Brooklyn, but we saw across the country. There were a number of there were people who were happy to take advantage of the situation. Now, whether it was Antifa on the far left, or whether it was white supremacists who have been itching for a race war for some time, going back at least 20 years. These kinds of protests get infiltrated by those who want to manipulate them for their own purposes. And the question is whether the legitimate protesters are able to get themselves together and siphon themselves out of that and evict the saboteurs, or whether we're going to start going down a very dark road.
I mean, that goes back even. Sorry, that goes back even further than 20 years. I mean, you go back to the union, like labor organizations, like Pinkerton agents would absolutely.
Oh, that is going back a ways.
Yeah, I'm just saying, I wouldn't want it to be a show where we don't talk about Pinkerton.
Right. Yeah, well,
and of course, COINTELPRO, yeah, in the late 60s and early 70s. Yeah, I mean, there is a history of what was the phrase that, oh, that's right, I just realized we're on Zoom, we can use these phrases. There was a rat fucking, where you
yeah, that's right, yeah.
You've been waiting to use that one, right?
Yeah.
Well, I've been the person who's responsible for that coming back into vogue is Roger Stone. I mean, because that's what he used to. That's a kind of dark arts that he used to do in the early 1970s, working for Nixon. What we would now call trolling. He would just figure out ways to make the other side look bad.
Right. What's funny is that trolling now is just like mean tweets. So I'm imagining Roger Stone following individual people around and just shouting obscenities and weird hashtags at them. By the way, rat fucking, I think, an incredible insult to rats. I also, I'm curious, and it's interesting. I think the Minnesota state government, there's a collection of the mayor of Minneapolis, the governor, the attorney general, a few people at a press conference today, and speaking to that point, Carol, about the arrests. I think if not all, then most of the arrests being people from out of state. That there is now it seems still very fluid, but this was Saturday morning that they had a press conference, that the sense that there is potentially a domestic or even foreign interference in some of these protests, and which if in an election year where Vladimir Putin has promised to interfere with our election, not great.
I mean, so I have a couple friends in Minneapolis, and I think you're seeing there were people setting fire to shit, but it was big box stores and police cars, and it was there. You saw a picture of there's one business that just wrote in Sharpie minority owned on a big piece of paper and taped it up to the window, and they did not get vandalized in any kind of way. And, I mean, unfortunately, that hasn't held up, and part of me wonders if who is it that's doing the looting? Is it people that are from the community? Because what you were saying for the first couple days was people completely there's a bookstore and a bike shop that are literally on the same, they're in the same block as the precinct, and they were completely untouched. But that hasn't held up. So I start to wonder about like who is doing the looting at this point, and like what does that mean. So I find that something that we like really have to look at.
Yeah, well, I guess one of my favorite things that I came across yesterday, and it was during the Atlanta protests, I came across on Twitter. There was a bunch of people looting and there was fire everywhere, but there was a group of about like 15 black dudes who were protecting the Waffle House. And we're like, no,
Not the Waffle House.
keep it going, keep it moving.
Look,
It's a step too far, my friend.
I married a woman from North Carolina, and I've learned the value of a Waffle House, so I get it. I might be a Northeast snob, but good Lord, you leave the Waffle House alone.
Well, in Brooklyn, in Crown Heights, Tom's restaurant, I don't know if you guys.
Yeah, I know Tom's. Yeah.
Amazing. They have a bunch of articles in there about during I think it was like the late 80s, early 90s. There were some riots like in that area, and a similar thing. The entire neighborhood joined hands and protected Tom's for the pancakes. So I guess what we learn is that what brings us all together is breakfast food.
Yeah.
I mean, the protesters have got to eat after they've finished everything. You know, I mean, come on. You know,
Exhausting.
Look, it takes a lot out of you.
Like you never hear a story about a Denny's going up in flames.
That's true. That's true.
Well, no. I will tell you this. Speaking from personal experience, if there's a Denny's on the block, if there's a Denny's on the block, black folks are going to be torching that first, with very good reason. Denny's,
I'm so disappointed to hear that because they literally have a menu item that's moons over my hammy. And I feel like that's right up your alley.
Yeah, I can't believe that's not good in the black community.
This is actually triggering for me because it was a couple of years after college. So yes, Tom Brennan, that was
1965-ish.
That was many centuries ago, exactly. No, I was in a Denny's with a lady friend of mine who happened to be Caucasian, and let's just say the service that we got was suboptimal, and it was kind of clear.
Like in human resources at the time.
There you go. Let's just say it was not Grand Slam service. I was.
Ooh.
There you go. It wasn't even a single. So.
This is like a vendetta against Denny's.
Yeah.
I've got a vendetta.
Yeah.
I have issues. I have issues with. I've got mega issues. I've got not MAGA, but mega issues with Denny's. This is true.
Oh dear. All right. Well done, Robert. That was a real good trip through time you took us on. You really hit all of your key issues in there. That was nice. It was really
far
if you
from
ever do
all
the
of them,
moth,
Tom.
that's your
Tom,
story.
You know me well enough that it was far
true.
from all of my issues.
That's true. If you ever do the moth, you start at the Denny's, but we land somewhere different. So let's pivot then. Pivot again. HR about the president's reaction to this, which dovetails very nicely to something brave that Twitter did ish. He on I think it was Thursday night tweeted out that he had spoken to the governor of Minnesota, and he couldn't abide this happening to a great American city. He would send in the National Guard, which I think the governors choose to send in the National Guard, not the president, but check me on that, Robert.
Well, the governors sent in the National Guard, but I believe, if I'm correct, the president said that there would be something like capital M military consequences. That's a slight paraphrase, but I do know that the military was definitely capitalized, and
that's big.
having actual military people, federal forces going into a state is basically against the Constitution unless there's an actual emergency where a governor requests them in, because we have a thing called posse comitatus, which prevents the army from being used domestically except in extraordinary circumstances. So that was kind of the beginning of the president's overstepping on Twitter. But that wasn't the worst.
No,
Take it away, Tom.
the worst was he followed up with saying, criticizing the protesters, saying they were ruining the memory of George Floyd, and that when the looting starts, the shooting starts, which is a phrase coined by a Florida police commissioner, and not
Do you really
in ways
think
that
Donald Trump has any idea?
no, he definitely doesn't know that. No, he realized that those two words rhymed. 100%. While writing, he was like, "What rhymes with looting?" But still, it is a phrase that has
Also, I mean, again, not to give him credit, but I don't think I've ever seen him reverse himself. And this was like he clarified what he meant. When does he do that? Like,
well,
It wasn't a complete reversal. It was a tip.
No, it was like I didn't mean that that the government would start shooting. I meant that if you loot, that you might get shot, by other people. There've been people shot, but like it was a very un-Trumpy thing to explain what he meant. Like,
yeah, you think somebody else somebody might have just grabbed his phone and was like, let me fix this real quick.
It could have been a Kellyanne Conway intervention because the initial tweet went out at I think it's at 10 to 4 in the morning or something like that.
It went out at it was 10 to 2. I remember because I was about to go to bed, and then I got the alert, and I was like, "Oh God!" just go. All I hear about this guy is how he's so lazy. Why doesn't he go to bed? It drives me nuts.
As our parents told us, nothing good comes after tweeting after 2 a.m.
That's true. My dad always said that. My dad always said that. We said, "What's Twitter, Dad?" And he said, "You'll find out." And then he zoomed away to the future. And Twitter, which has already started putting disclaimers up on his tweets and other people's tweets, but on his, put a disclaimer up on the president's tweets, flagging it, warning people that it could potentially be seen as inciting violence. Then the White House Twitter account tweeted the same message out, and that got flagged too. Which led to me realizing that I, in the year 2020, had to answer a Twitter form question of who is the White House targeting, me or someone else, which is just an amazing thing to do. So he's now getting flagged by social media, and this response played an integral role in it. But he's still, as Marcely mentioned, as of this morning, still tweeting some strong response. He tweeted strong response on protests at the White House last night. And he now has found himself with a sheriff in Twitter. I'm curious about thoughts on the sheriff Twitter. And I'll start with a story from my own life, which is on Christmas Day this year, I was banned from Twitter, much to the joy of my family, because on Christmas Eve, now I guess Kevin Spacey's annual tradition on Christmas Eve is to release one of those weird videos where he's sort of Frank Underwood. And I quote tweeted it. I replied to it saying, "Eat shit and die." And then I was immediately banned. Now I'm going to give Twitter a solid, fair thing. I did.
Everybody says that.
Well, here's the thing. Here's my thing. They don't know that I can't actually do that to Kevin Spacey, but I would say I don't have the authority or power to force him to eat shit and die. And the president does have the authority and power to start shooting.
Yep.
So I'm just curious. Having run into Twitter's rules before, independent of him being the president, I am just struck by the fact that the rules apply differently on Twitter. And the fact that they have these disclaimers for Twitter is a big deal, because for the longest time, they're just like, nothing we can do.
I mean,
on the website. What's that?
Website. But on Facebook, I was put on a 30-day ban because I wrote that men are trash.
Oh.
Which is not even a threat.
Can you back that up with facts, though?
I bet you can back that up with many facts.
Just pick up a history of the world. Oh yeah, there it is.
Yeah, that was, and I acknowledge different platform, and obviously Zuckerberg has had a very different reaction to the president in general. But I do think that's interesting because, as Tom said, the president arguably can shoot people.
Yeah.
I, on the other hand, cannot actually prove that men are trash.
Yeah.
Posit my theory.
Yeah. You can provide a lot of info, but you can't concretely, prove that with. Yeah. No, I get it. We'll bring this up on the science show next week.
What I thought was interesting, though, once I actually encountered it on Twitter and I saw that the tweet had been masked, I was like, you know what? I actually think that I do agree with this, because I don't think it's a good idea for us to cover up what a terrible trash garbage person our president is, because people have to be able to see that, because the last thing that we want is to be hidden, because I think anything that we've learned right now is like all the terrible stuff about like our world that we knew about is just being surfaced through COVID and all of these other things. So I actually do think it's right that he is like, that it's there for people to see, and people have to be able to like reconcile the fact that this is the stuff that's coming from our president and
For sure.
and he's in charge of us. So if anything, I wish they would change the algorithm so that people who like would naturally like disagree with me that the president is a trash pile, would actually see some of these things that he's like writing.
I think they do.
Yeah, I think they do, and I
In my
think
experience,
the issue is they agree with it regardless.
Yeah.
It doesn't really change their minds.
Well, I mean,
Rather good.
The fallout of this back and forth with the president was that he issues an executive order, which basically said that he was working towards, he can't do this unilaterally. He wants to work toward changing, I think it's section 230 of, I think it's it's not the FCC. The FCC has oversight on this, but it's basically the section that says that Twitter and Facebook and so forth are considered platforms as opposed to publishers, which basically says that if Tom posts something on Twitter that could be considered libelous.
like if I told Kevin Spacey to eat shit.
Yeah, well, yeah, or even something. Yeah, exactly.
Although that was a suggestion, not a. But still, I can see how they read it that way.
But a lot of it has to do with specific liability, so that Twitter would not be considered legally liable because you may have said a libelous statement towards an individual.
So,
whereas,
like, if he did eat shit and die,
whereas
Twitter would not be held accountable for that.
Whereas, I mean, I work for the Daily News.
Shit so many times today.
I work for the Daily News. Carol is a columnist at the New York Post. Both of those papers run letters to the editor. And aside from checking for, to make sure that sentence structure works and so forth, if a reader makes a statement that could be potentially considered libelous, the Daily News or the New York Post could be sued by the person who felt libeled or defamed, because we're publishers and we're considered to be responsible for disseminating potentially defamatory or libelous material. Internet companies, whether we're talking Twitter or Facebook or Reddit and YouTube and so forth, those have always been considered different. And now, if they want to try and change this, that would potentially expose Twitter to all kinds of lawsuits if people felt defamed or biased against and so forth. The flip side of that is, though, that could actually arguably give Twitter even more power, because they're going to be like newspaper editors.
They could reject our tweets.
Yeah,
They could reject our tweets for more than
right.
just...
This thing right here is borderline. Take out this phrase. Take out that phrase. Or this person is regularly running things that could be considered problem. We won't publish him at all. So that's part of the problem that this could lead to.
I'm curious, I guess, like, this is, I didn't plan to talk about this, but I'm just curious, like, what do we think about that? Like, should social media platforms be viewed as platforms or publishers at this point? I don't know where I come down on that. Like, I'm someone, like, I very, very specifically curate my feed. Like, I'm comfortable, like, I muted the president back when he was just a game show host. So I'm good. Like, I don't like what he says. I sort of am, I'd say, like, my point before is simply, like, I don't really object. I don't think Twitter should take his account away, but I, just wish it was subjected to the same rules that I was when I tweeted. Again, I thought a very polite suggestion to Kevin Spacey. You know, but I'm not, you know, I think given I'm not clear, and I think Robert, that point about like publisher, like I also alternately don't love the idea of like, you know, someone at Twitter being like, hey Tom, we get it, you really want to talk about how your dad's great, but we're bored by it, taking it down. Like, that would seem odd. My dad would like that. He doesn't like that social media knows he exists. But I'm curious, what do we think? You know, should these be viewed as publishers? Do they have a greater responsibility to the content that happens, or, you know, or not?
I don't know. I think in general, the internet is in so many ways still such a wild, wild west, because there's no precedent for every website, like Reddit, like who, you know, 20, 30 years ago could have imagined something like Reddit, or even like Wikipedia, right. Like the idea of these like open spaces where anybody can write something with little to no oversight. There's no precedent for that.
I love the idea of a hard copy Wikipedia. This is like an encyclopedia, but it's Mad Lib style, and people just fill in whatever random.
Well, I think the equivalent was like in grade school when you do the one sentence story where you would write a sentence and then pass it to the next desk.
Yeah.
Like
that was the first Wikipedia.
That's the first Wikipedia.
That's also how I won the Battle of Thermopylae. Go ahead.
Yeah. So that's not necessarily an answer, but I do think that part of why we don't really know what to do with these spaces and in terms of their responsibility socially, you know, legally, is because there is no precedent and we're literally writing the law as we go along.
Yeah, I'm wondering, and I'm just thinking of this. Maybe folks with a blue check next to their name might be, you know, held to a different standard, because once you're verified, you know, maybe you're considered, you know, you obviously have a longer reach or a wider reach than, you know,
and more authority in theory.
And more authority.
A trusted source. Carol has a blue check, don't you?
So do you, Robert.
Correctly?
You not have a blue check, Robert?
I do have a blue check, but I'm too humble.
Are you calling me out?
All right, blue check marks, justify yourselves.
You know,
also, how'd you get one? Can I get one?
I know, right?
I definitely, not that I feel like I conduct myself better because I have a blue check, but at some point along the way, I stopped. I wrote about it too, but like how I stopped calling people names on Twitter. Like I used to just be like, you clown, you jackass, eat shit and die. But I don't know. I felt like and it was partly because I you know, my visceral reaction every time Donald Trump did it, and I would be like, I'm doing the same thing. I need to like stop this. But the blue check definitely also moved me in that direction, like just to conduct myself a little bit differently.
Yeah.
Well, I also realize that I mean, I'm a public person, but I also realize that I work for an institution. I work for a journalistic institution. And even though it's my personal account, it says right in my bio, columnist, editorial board member, the Daily News. And so some of the things that I'm gonna be putting out there are going to reflect on my employer. So I'm going to have to be be careful. Actually not be careful, but be responsible. I mean, Tom kind of teases me about the fact that, generally speaking, I don't have any. There's no profanity on my Twitter feed.
I still have profanity.
What?
I said I still have profanity. Just
well,
because
Carol puts
she was born in Brooklyn.
Check mark. This is true. Born in Brooklyn, right?
Oh, raised in Brooklyn. Yeah.
But my go-to adjective, as Tom knows, is effing. You know, EFFING, and I just put that out there. It's just kind of my tag. But
yeah,
what do you
mean by that when you say effing? What does that stand for?
Well,
sorry.
Gosh darn it if I know, Tom. You know, it is what it is. But no, I do think that if you did force, if Twitter did become a publisher versus a versus a platform, I think it would definitely take a major fiscal hit, because but it would be also at the expense not just of the company but the users there, because I think it would just start to randomly just remove hordes of people, because they would basically say it's too much of a headache to police police all of these people, to try and track down all of these kind of phrases. It's easier just to wipe all of them off and adopt a completely different business model. And that might make some people on the left and the right kind of satisfied, but it would also harm the speech of people who, some people have like maybe 400 or 500 followers out there, but they have like a nice little conversation going with those people, but they could lose some serious access.
Oh, what do you think? I want to make sure we get everyone in on this.
I think a lot of I think Twitter in and of itself, when it started, like, I wouldn't have considered anything near a publisher, and I certainly don't agree that they should be considered one, at least right at this moment. But I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that it's operating within a capital system. It cares about its investors, and when you have that, and then you have advertisements, and then you have algorithms that serve up different things to different people, that's the shit that makes it feel much more like a publisher. Like, for whatever reason, Twitter always thinks that I like super care what's happening on like like any of those housewives shows, or the things that end up being trending and news to me makes me feel terrible about myself. And I'm like, is this what the internet thinks of me? Like, I only really care about like The Walking Dead and like, I don't know, like like I clicked on one thing one time, and then all of a sudden I get served up like all this stuff that I don't care about. So that's the thing that I think makes it feel like a publisher. Like, just that like For You tab is like, it's either good or it's like a real dark side of history.
Particularly, I tweeted a joke once about. Oh God, Robert. Sorry, Robert. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, how did they never come up with the real zombie housewives of Atlanta? I mean, that's
good question. They just haven't come up with it yet, Robert.
I would watch the shit out of that.
I made a joke once on Twitter about men's rights activists, and I started getting served men's rights activist content. And let me tell you something, that is a dark world. Like, that is, man, a lot of angry people out there. It is.
I'm curious. Everyone here has a Twitter, correct?
I have a Twitter, yes.
Because I technically have one. I haven't posted anything in 7 years.
Yeah, I remember that. I noted that the other day.
Yeah.
I check in. I see how you're doing.
No, I literally just started to post mountain lion facts. Whatever. It was a phase I was going through. But
it's a good phase. I remembered it.
But it's interesting to me because every time people talk about social media, I view it through the lens of Facebook, which I am active on, but I'm not super active on Twitter. And I think they are two very different playgrounds, if that makes sense.
100%. I've noticed, like, if nothing else, go ahead.
No, Tom.
Sorry. Thank you. I was gonna say, like, I've noticed, if nothing else, like, the person I am on Twitter is very angry and political and ready to instigate with literally any rando with 2 followers. And the person I am on Facebook is trying to be a better person. It's like,
yeah,
he always succeed, but he's trying a lot. He's trying real hard to just like not make it too, when my aunt or cousins who are a little more to the right of me chime in, I try and do a little more like, hey, let them finish. I don't agree with everything, but their family. Then on Twitter, it's just, I nuke it from orbit, man. Sorry, Robert, go ahead.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, no, I think one of the best things that happened to me, I think it was about a year, it must have been about a year and a half or so ago. For the longest of time, you were able to link your Twitter and Facebook accounts. So anything that I tweeted automatically became a Facebook post. And then I don't know whether Twitter changed the algorithm or Facebook changed it, and that no longer happens. So
I was so happy when that ended for everybody.
well, it's funny. Initially, I found it annoying, and I was thinking, oh, now I'm going to have to manually, cut and paste my Twitter Twitter post and then put it back onto Facebook, and that's annoying. But then suddenly I realized, wow, this solves a whole lot of headaches.
Mhm.
I can pick and choose. There are certain times where there's a definite post that I've got on Twitter that I want my Facebook Facebook friends to see. Most of the time when I do that, though, it's something funny, like a really really good pun that I think everybody needs to see at that
really
time.
good pun.
Or,
Hold on, I want to hear your definition of a very good pun.
Are there really, really good puns?
Yeah, I mean it's good.
Anyway,
A C is better than
it's
a
gonna-
D.
or I'm promoting
Get through it.
or I'm promoting a column I wrote, and so I'll put that there. But generally speaking, I allow Twitter to be the moment by moment commentary of what's going on in the world, and then on Facebook, if there's some actual personal news that I want to share, or as I said, that there's like something like really that's important or really really funny that I think that my friends are gonna like, and just kind of keep them updated here and there, and creating those very different zones turned out to be good for my emotional health, and I think for other people as well.
Yeah,
You were saying that you were saying something similar. I'm sorry, Carol. You were saying something similar when they made that.
No,
Oh,
I
okay.
hated the double content. I'm super in the category that I think Facebook should be mostly a politics free zone, where you like talk to your like friends from when you were child, and do you really want like your somebody you worked with 3 jobs ago arguing with like your kid's parents that you're friends with? Like, why do you need that in your Facebook? And so I keep Twitter my political world. I keep my personal Facebook page completely free of it.
Facebook tends to be the place where people from high school who have a bone to pick with my politics, though, are like, hey, I saw you tweeted this, and I'm going to bring it up on your wall. And I'm like, oh, great.
delete, immediately delete, don't even care.
I literally don't even remember you. Not even try to be mean. So I think, first of all, I have to say, if nothing else, this conversation has taught me that all of us are probably better kids than any of the Trump kids, because I feel like one of those Trump kids should have by now just taken Twitter away from him, because like my dad is an angry man in his 70s, and he fortunately does not like social media, and he's not getting involved. But even so, the one time he's like, do you think I get a Twitter account? I was like, oh, you don't want a Twitter account, Dad, trust me on this.
That generation, it's like, I mean, there was that whole thing when coronavirus started, that nobody can get their parents to stay home or like take it seriously. Like now you want to like get them off Twitter, it's impossible.
Yeah.
Like, if they're on social media, they're on social media. Like there's no reasoning with those people.
I'm infinitely grateful that my dad is paranoid and stays off social media. And since he'll listen to this episode, hey Dad, happy birthday. I think I want to move to one more thing and we'll call it a day. His birthday is on Sunday. Call one more thing and we'll call it.
Happy birthday, Mr. Brennan.
Yes, happy birthday.
Oh,
Birthday.
Robert brought this to our attention. It's not nearly the most important thing that happened this week, but I want to talk about it for a minute, which is to say the good people at the publisher Forbes have determined that Kylie Jenner, it was Kylie, correct?
God, which one was
not a billionaire?
Yeah, Kylie, guys.
He's not a billionaire. So
Kylie.
first of all,
I knew Carol would remember that.
I can't keep up.
rough week for the country. All right, we lost one of our greatest billionaires.
That's why we need Kylie more than ever.
Right. Thoughts, opinions on her being a fake billionaire? Sorry, go ahead, Darcy.
No, just question for clarification of which one she is. Is she the one who had that unfortunate Pepsi commercial?
No, that's Kendall.
Okay.
I knew Carol would know all of the.
Oh, good.
I'm not
Is it because they all have K first names, Carol?
It's
harder.
What was the hilarious? This is just like one of those kind of karma coming to bite you on the ass kind of thing, because when it was announced I think it was about a year and a half ago, that Forbes or Fortune, one of the two at the time, when they initially announced that she was the youngest, not the youngest billionaire, but the youngest self-made billionaire.
That's the difference.
I'm about to go full Kylie defender here.
Oh well, no, because Carol and I argued about this at the time, because there were a lot of very smart, wise thinking people who said, wait a second, you're part of this family of grifters. I mean, excuse me, this reality family who kind of gave your makeup and so forth a boost. So you are already kind of well on the road to high value wealth, and yet somehow they're deeming you self-made. And so there were a number of people who disagreed with that. Some people, like the lovely Ms. Markowitz over here, disagreed. So if you wanted to
defend, you've earned it.
The rest of them are billionaires.
Say again?
So first of all, I think it's the most first world problems ever. Does she have 500 million or does she have a cool billion? Like, really? This is where we are? We're like counting somebody else's money to like have them on a list.
What else
now,
is Forbes gonna do?
What I really don't get about it is like, so apparently, I'm sure that the Kardashians campaign to be on these lists, but what difference does it make? It's like insane amounts of money that none of us are ever going to see. Like, and yet we're like spending our time figuring out whether or not they're rich or like very rich, and absolutely she was self-made, because not a single one of them has been able to do what she did. And how many celebrity kids are like total losers and like laying by their parents' pool? And okay, so now maybe she made just 500 million from it, but she's still self-made.
I don't think there's such thing as a self-made rich person, because like there's so much that goes into.
Agree on that.
Yeah,
Certainly a self-made billionaire.
Yeah, like I tend to think that Jay-Z is more of a self-made billionaire. If we're given where
now
more so.
So is there a self-made billionaire or isn't there? I agree.
I don't think either one, because like there are so many people behind the scenes who contributed to Jay-Z's.
I think the conversation is whether they got a leg up from where they were, and Jay-Z clearly didn't. And the thing is, Kylie could only get a leg up to to the same extent as any celebrity child, and most of them don't do what she did. Therefore, she built it.
But
herself.
I think being Kylie Jenner, being somebody who's on television, just having that being your starting point, that means that you have way more followers than I do. So it's a lot easier to have people buy into whatever product that you're selling. So I think.
Well, I mean that is the thing.
There was a story right around the time that Kylie became a billionaire, and this was like, I think, something we discussed. There was some influencer Instagram girl who I've never heard of, but has hundreds of thousands of followers, and she needed to sell 28 T-shirts to launch her own line, and she was unable to do that. And clearly, no story ever said how much these T-shirts cost. So maybe they were like $300 or something, but 28 of them, like, and yet she had. All these followers who just wouldn't buy them.
Well,
followers don't mean money.
Those shirts probably.
A lot of it does have to do. Does have to do with how you're able to.
Those shirts were made of dollar bills.
How you're able to leverage. How you're able to leverage the followers. I completely agree with that. But as Marcelly said, if you're a Kardashian, you definitely get the initial boost on the followership, and sure, she managed to market herself and leverage the makeup. But as we now find out from Forbes, to actually get from, say, the 500 millionaire place to the billionaire status had to do with something like faking tax returns.
I love the idea that like that's
causes some people. Which is why some people think, 40 or 50 years from now, she'll be president of the United States.
I have two questions.
You start by becoming a fake billionaire, and then you.
Now is she one of Robin?
Well, she's actually done the same. She's actually done the same thing. What's that?
Is she one of Robert's kids or Caitlin's kids? Okay.
Caitlin, yeah.
I assume, I don't know.
Jenner, Kylie Jenner.
Yeah, I don't know. And sometimes people take other people's last names. I want to say whatever happened this week, I think I want to, as someone who works in social media and who's worked in publishing, I just want to say to whoever's job at Forbes, who probably was like, so there was a moment where this person was like, we should do this story. I do want to remind you, 100,000 Americans died this week. Do we really want to post the story about who's a real billionaire today? And someone was like, we have to post it today. And he was like, all right. And I've clicked enter on that. Go ahead, Mo.
The name of that person on the Forbes staff is Chase Peterson Withorn.
Oh man. Okay. Then based off that last name, I may judge that person as not being as concerned as I would.
Three names. Never.
Yeah. Well, Chase, we're thinking of you.
Well, remember, Tom. Remember one thing though. This happened. This happened the same, like within a couple of days after John Krasinski sold his Some Good News to CBS.
Some very good news for him.
So that. Oh wait. Oh my goodness. Did we lose Carol? Oh,
we may have lost Carol.
He's so upset about Some Good News being sold.
Yeah, she really cared.
Well, no, but if we needed some good news, and if you can't laugh at the embarrassment of a pseudo billionaire in the middle of a pandemic, what else can you do?
Certainly, when can you? I think we'll leave it there. We'll see if we can get Carol to rejoin us, but otherwise we'll move on to the last segment of the show, which is where we give folks something to do at home, something to read, listen to, watch, or just do. And I'm going to throw out very quickly, and I'll drop this in the comment section to the show, but Paul F. Tompkins has a great Twitter thread that really resonated with me. It talked about growing up as as a white person in a very democratic, progressive, leading working class place, and still having to reconcile with the racism that he enabled and allowed to happen around him, and realizing that he was not immune from it. And it really it spoke to me in such a great way as someone have been reflecting on my own life. And I talk a lot of, I was raised by really good parents, and happy birthday again, Dad, who really, I think, pushed me to be mindful of my privilege. And I grew up in a very progressive place, but I still had so much to learn about listening and about understanding what people of color, and particularly Black people, go through in this country. And it's a great thread, and I recommend folks read it. I'll drop it in the comments. That is my recommendation for the week. Mo, something for folks to do at home.
Well, I was going to go the serious route and say people should just Google anti-racism resources for white people, because I just think that's a thing that everyone, including some non-white people, probably need to read. But I think if that's a little heavy for your
back.
I would tell people to follow R. Eric Thomas, who writes a column for Elle magazine, and it is equal parts talking about Chris Evans's cozy sweater in Knives Out and systemic racism in America. So it's a little both and for your weekend reading.
Thank you very much, Marcely. Something for people to read, listen to, watch, do while they're at home.
I have two in mind that come in. So first, during this whole quarantine, I've for the first time discovered doing yoga via YouTube, and I really love it. So it was my first time trying it. Actually, the first time I tried it, it was like the P90X yoga, and it was a long time ago, and that was overwhelming. And I was like, I'm never doing this shit again. But yeah, just doing yoga, it, physically and mentally and spiritually, it's very uplifting and fulfilling for me. But the second thing I would say definitely just check in on your Black friends. Make sure that everybody's okay. I really appreciate the people that have reached out to me via social media or via text message. I even got a few phone calls with people just checking in to see that I'm okay. And it definitely helped a little bit. I mean, I'm still obviously very impacted by everything that's been going on. Continually seeing folks who look like me being murdered. So it's very overwhelming emotionally. But yeah, I think if you have any Black people in your life that you care about and that you love, I think just shooting a text message or something like that, it goes a long way.
Thank you very much, Darcy. Something for folks to do while they are cooped up at home.
Sure. I have two things. One, going off of the theme of Kylie Jenner and rich white ladies, I recommend that you watch the documentary about Taylor Swift on Netflix. Go with me on this.
Hey, look, she's
go
she's using her greater Twitter reach to call out Donald Trump this week. So.
Yeah, we didn't touch on that, and
she's got 2 million more followers than him. So.
Yeah. While not perfect, it is an interesting kind of thing to watch in terms of an artist who is a very public persona and was very hesitant to reach into the political sphere for fear of backlash, eventually doing it. And I feel like it was a very honest and sympathetic kind of portrayal of that. And I mean, don't worry, I mean, Taylor's fine, no matter what. She's fine. But I don't know, I thought it was interesting and well done. And what else are you doing?
Yeah, I think anyone who is in the cast of Cats gets to say whatever they want at this point, regardless. Carol, welcome back. Oh, sorry, I apologize.
Sorry. And given the current spectrum of the world, I'm gonna go into my backwoods, folksy, hippie, raised child roots and say, check out Pete Seeger. Listen to some OG protest music.
Oh, thank you, Darcy, for being you. Carol, welcome back. We're talking about things that folks it's quite all right. Things for folks to do cooped up inside. And also, if you had any final thought you didn't get to on the gender situation, you're welcome.
I feel like I summed up my Kylie.
Look, you made your case very well.
I've been with I have 3 kids, and I've been taking them back to 1980s TV shows. We were watching Little House on the Prairie, and now we're watching The Incredible Hulk. The good one.
Good, yeah.
Mm-hmm. It was really good.
And they're really into it. We watched, a couple of episodes already, and they love it, and it's awesome, and I feel like better than anything they're watching now. So, Little House on the Prairie and The Incredible Hulk.
I love about that show, you can't do shows like that anymore because everything has to have complicated, B stories and weird conspiracies.
Right, same story every week.
Every writer's room for that was all right, what town is he walking into this week, and who is with him?
Yeah.
And why? Robert, take us home for folks to
just a couple of cosigns on what Darcy and Carol said. The Darcy point is that this is an observation I put on Twitter yesterday because it just kind of struck me that so much of what's going on in politics and culture right now seems to have dated back to 2 particular weird things that happened more than 10 years ago and slightly under 10 years ago. The 2009 VMAs, where Kanye West and Taylor Swift had that weird moment, and that turned out to be strange because a couple of days later, Barack Obama referred to Kanye West as a jackass, which apparently helped put Kanye West on the road to MAGA. So that was kind of weird. And then I was also then reminded a couple of years after that, Obama, tears into Donald Trump at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, and that put Donald Trump on the road to the White House. So that's just you never know. You never know what's going to happen there. I remember teasing Carol a little bit on Twitter about the Little House on the Prairie stuff, and then somebody points out just a few weeks ago of this amazing episode where a pre-Different Strokes Todd Bridges appears and drops the N-word and explains in class why he wished he wasn't born that way, and he tells Pa whatever the Michael Landon's character's last name was. He says, well, would you prefer to live what? Yeah, right. Would you prefer to live to 50 as a white man, or live to 100 as a nigger? And and this is the 1970s. This is the 1970s, and it's like, whoa! I mean, it's like more woke than a lot of stuff that's out there today. Anyway, on stuff that I would look at. Something I've mentioned before, and our friend Craig Liggins had also mentioned before, but the last episode of Mrs. America on Hulu aired this past week, and you can watch the whole 9 episodes series on Hulu, focusing on the women's movement and the counter movement of Phyllis Schlafly in the 1970s, and some like really, well, first of all, excellent acting in there, and I would say it's really in my view, the fairest depiction of the rise of the conservative movement in the 1970s that I've seen in any kind of a docudrama, and it also gives you some like really insights on how politics works in the real world, and even allies, which will give kind of mini betrayals of one another on left and right. I mean, it's just like real. It's rather real. I mean, they play fast and loose here and there with some of the relationships, which you can always imagine. But it's like a really good series, and I recommend that. In terms of reading, I am going back to one of the great black minds of the 20th century, James Baldwin. Because given the time that we're in right now and protests and things like that, I'm looking at his essay, "The Fire Next Time," and which is basically a letter to one of his nephews, a black boy growing up, and highly recommend that.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Robert. And that is it for our show this week. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you, Mo.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marcely. Thank you, Darcy. Thank you, Carol. And thank you, Robert George. And another
thank you.
Thanks just before we go. Thank you very much to Kevin Scott for our show animation. Thank you to Joanne Harris for the show theme song. Thank you to Declan Schaub and Jordy Belair for the show Eagle. And thank you to Ned Thorne for helping me put these together every single week. Our musical guest this week is a wonderful performer named Keith Alessi. His one-man show, Tomatoes Tried to Kill Me, but Banjo Saved My Life, is a great show about, not putting off the things that we've always wanted to do, and that is something to be mindful of right now. So Ned Thorne, star wipe us down to Virginia and down to Keith Alessi.
Hello to everyone out there in electoral dysfunction land. Keith Alessi here from Meadows of Dan, Virginia, Floyd County, high up on the escarpment of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Social distancing comes natural here. Nearest neighbor is about a quarter mile away. Going to play 2 small local tunes for you. The first, Shooting Creek, named after a creek. It shoots out of the mountain about 10 miles from here. Second, Floyd Country Store Jam. Stay safe wherever you are.